Hello everybody, welcome back to another Age of Sigmar Warcry video, where today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the newly released Vulkyn Flameseekers. We're going to be doing some list building with them. We are going to be taking a look at all of the units that they have. We're going to see what's good, what's maybe not so good. And yeah, hopefully we are going to come to some conclusions that will help you out in building your lists. But before we get into that, if you want to see more faction focuses like this, of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also now, if you want to give me a little bit more support, you can join me on YouTube, you can join me on Patreon, you get to see some behind the scenes content, you'll get to see what I'm working on next, or alternatively, if that's not the thing for you, you can give some support over on Streamlabs. But yeah, without further ado, let's get going into the video. Okay, so we're going to start with the Vulkyn Flameseekers reaction. The reaction is called Runic Flare. What it allows your fighters to do is they can make the reaction after being targeted for an attack, and it will turn up to 2 crits from your opponent into normal hits instead. This reaction is shared by Seraphon. I've used it to good effect when playing things like Seraphon Bladeborn and those kinds of fighters, really to extend out the life of your guys. A word into when you would want to use this, how you would want to use this. Generally speaking, your basic Fire Slayers are going to put out more damage with an action than they would keep health with this reaction. But what it's very good for is making it so that those really big characters of your opponents, maybe things like Varangard and similar things, possibly with a 3-5 damage profile or a 2-5 damage profile, it's very good at keeping those in check. So on that turn, because your Fire Slayers are generally very slow, they all mostly have movement 3. So on that turn, when they get charged, I find it's a very useful reaction for you to get charged, take the hit, and then on the return, you can do your swing and do a little bit of damage. Obviously, you need to look at the odds of how much damage your opponent is going to do to you, and if it would be worth using this ability. I found that it's very useful on cheaper chaff units, because they might not necessarily have the amount of wounds in order to take the attack. But if you use something like this, you can turn maybe 10 or even 15 wounds worth of damage into 6 or 7. And that's very useful. It slows down your opponent and it provides them with a big meaty speed bump that they can't just bulldoze their way through to allow their really big, strong units to just do whatever it wants on the battlefield. Moving into the character and the leader of the Flameseekers, we have the Vulkyn Runefather. There are a couple of different flavors of Runefather. One has the master-crafted Bokaz, and the other one has the Drothblood Great Axe. Little bit of points difference between the two. The Bokaz is 170 points. Great Axe is 165. Apart from that, they have very similar profiles. They've got the movement 3 that is shared basically by all dwarves. These guys have toughness 5, which is very good. They got 22 wounds, which isn't terrible for a bespoke leader. What you're going to see among all of the Fire Slayers, actually, that we're going to be looking at, is each one of them has this ranged attack, and that ranged attack is going to be range 8, 2 shots, strength 4, 1-3 damage, which is and isn't useful at the same time. The fact that they have this ranged attack means that generally they will be paying above points for the stats that they're bringing to the table. But on the other hand, it's something that might be useful to have. Maybe they're hunkering down on a point and they want to get some damage projection in there, maybe attack something that's on another objective or attack something else that has treasure or something they can't necessarily catch, in which case it might be useful for a minor ranged attack like this. Looking at the differences between the two profiles themselves, we have the Bokaz, which has 3 attacks at strength 5 with 2-5 damage, and the Great Axe, which is 4 attacks, so 1 more attack, strength 4, so you'll be using that wound on 3's profile a little bit less, at 2-4 damage. If we're going to compare the two, I've got the damage statistics down here for you, and you can see it. So the Bokaz generally is going to be doing less damage because it has 1 less attack, but it's going to be using that wounds on 3 profiles a lot more. So ultimately, when you look at the average damage over a variety of different toughnesses, you'll see that the Bokaz is actually quite favorable to the Great Axe. There isn't all that much in it in terms of damage, and so it will really depend on what kind of enemies you expect to face. If you think you're going to be facing a lot more toughness 4, maybe toughness 5 things, then maybe the Bokaz is the way to go. Alternatively, if you think you're going to be facing a lot more toughness 3, maybe you're going up against Soulblight Grave Lords or a lot of the undead factions, then maybe the Great Axe is the build that you want to bring, because that extra attack, still wounding on 3s in that case, will generally be more useful for you. The Vulkyn Runefather, it actually doesn't have any abilities of its own. Generally, what you'll see with other warbands is that the leader will have its own special leader ability that you can use. But the Runefather in this case, it just has the generic abilities of the warband. Some of these are pretty good, starting with the double blazing impetus. A fighter can only make this ability after making 2 move actions in the same activation, and then the fighter gets a bonus move action or a bonus disengage action. I think this is very good. It will allow your basic Fire Slayers to actually get across the board. They only have movement 3, but if you throw a double into this, they will get to effectively move 3 times, or if they move twice to get into combat with a thing, they can make their free disengage action to leave and get around whatever it is they're attacking. Maybe there's treasure on the other side, maybe there's an objective on the other side, or maybe there's a fighter on the other side that you want to tie up, and this ability will allow you to do that. So I think it's quite useful. Its second ability here is Ignite Weapon. So what you get to do is count 1 miss from the next attack action made by this fighter as a critical hit instead. So the numbers on this are interesting. I'm going to caveat this by saying I had to make certain assumptions during the maths to try and figure out exactly how this ability compares with something like Onslaught. And effectively what I did is I said, okay, if the chances to miss are more than 0.5, so we're talking about if we're wounding on 3s, for example, you're going to be missing 1/3 of the time. You times that 1/3 by the amount of attacks, and that'll give you the chance to miss at least 1 attack in your action. If that's more than 0.5, so rounding up, we're going to assume that Ignite Weapons worked, and we effectively get free crit damage. That's how I did it. There's probably a better way to do it, but for purposes of this, I think it gives you a good idea of the ability and how it stacks up to other abilities like Onslaught, like other things that might give you extra damage. And I've given you the damage profiles here for that. We can see that the average damage with Ignite Weapons for the Great Axe, I've got it as 9.33. Again, because the guy, he's swinging with 3 attacks, on average, he's going to miss 1, whether he's wounding on 3s, 4s, or 5s. The weighted average damage for Onslaught, this is just from 1 attack, is 6.67. Now, Ignite Weapons only works for the next attack, whereas Onslaught, if we are doing an attack during our activation, Onslaught will work on both. So how does that compare between the two? For the Great Axe, we can see that doing an Ignite Weapon and a normal attack, we're going to be doing 14.66 damage, and on a double attack with Onslaught, we're going to be doing 13.34. So it definitely does look like, for the Great Axe at least, that Ignite Weapons would be the way to go, especially if you are only getting to attack once. The idea being that Onslaught, with your extra attack, on average, even if you hit, you're only going to do 2 damage. And with Ignite Weapons, even if you miss, you're going to do 4 or 5. So it's almost worth maybe 1.5, maybe 2 extra attacks, Ignite Weapons. And that's why I really think that you're going to be using it over a lot of your other abilities, especially when you're in combat. Looking at the Bokaz, similarly, it has an average damage of 10.25 when you're using your Ignite Weapons versus 7 for Onslaught. So your double attack, your flaming weapons plus a normal attack is going to be doing 15.5 damage versus 14 on your double attack with Onslaught. So again, it looks a lot like Ignite Weapons is going to be the double that you want to be using. An interesting point of comparison here between the Great Axe and the Bokaz. We said that when we're just using normal attacks, there isn't all that much in it. But once you apply Ignite Weapons, the Bokaz, because it does have that crit of 5, it's suddenly doing more damage on that crit, but there's less chance overall for you to miss because you're wounding on 3s. Now, despite that, it looks like the Bokaz will be averaging probably 1 point more damage than the Great Axe. I think despite that, just because of the versatility of the Great Axe, because it does have those 4 attacks, and you can still use Ignite Weapons to get a whole bunch of damage off, personally, I'd be looking at the Great Axe when I'm building my lists. Moving on to the Drothblood Thane here, it is 140 points, again, movement 3, toughness 5. This one's got 20 wounds, which is pretty good for a fighter of that points cost. 5/4/2/4 damage profile, which is real good. Again, it's got that ranged attack. It's got its own triple Berserk Rampage. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking one enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter, and you're going to be rolling 6 dice. For each result that matches the value of this ability, you allocate a number of damage points to that enemy fighter equal to the value of the ability. For any other result, you allocate 1 damage point to the fighter. To give you an example here, Let's say you rolled triple threes. You'll roll your 6 dice, and then for each result that equals a 3, you're going to be doing 3 damage to your opponent, and for each result that isn't a 3, you're going to be doing 1 damage. At the very least, you'll always be doing 6 damage to your opponent, even if you roll your 6 dice and none of them come up as the same as whatever it is the dice value was. Looking at the chances of you matching the dice value, I've got the statistics here. The chances of rolling at least one match, so you roll your 6 dice, and if one of them matches, is 66.5%, so that's pretty good. The chance of 2 matches, 26.3%, and then it goes down 3, 4, 5, and 6 matches. What we're saying is that there's over a 90% chance that you will roll 1 or 2 matches when rolling your 6 dice. This makes Berserk Rampage potentially extremely strong. Even on an average triple, let's say a triple 4 that you rolled, there's a 66% chance of you getting 1 match, which is you do your 4 damage plus another 5 because you don't match with anything else, which is 9 damage, which is actually quite a bit for a triple to be putting out. But there's also a 26% chance of you getting 2 matches. And if you get 2 matches, you're going to be doing 4 times 2, so 8 damage, plus another 4 damage. So you're going to be doing anywhere between 9 and 12 damage almost 90% of the time. And that's crazy big. I think the Thane is actually one of the stars of the list, and I'd be looking to take at least 1 or 2 in any list that I end up building. Looking at his stats themselves, you'll see an average weighted damage of 6.67 per attack, which is pretty good. Of course, he does have the ability to use flaming weapons, so if you don't have your triple for Berserk Rampage, you can still always throw a double into him. You're looking at over 17 points of damage on average, which is real strong. And off one attack, it's 10.67 points of damage. Like I said, I think the Thane is very strong. I think it's something that you want to be concentrating on. We're going to see a little bit later some of the things that you can do with Divine Blessings on the Thane to make him just a little bit more effective. And yeah, I think definitely MVP of the list. Next, we're going to go into the Drothmaster. He is 125 points. So again, not amazingly expensive, but he does pay, of course, for that ranged ability like everyone else does. He is movement 3, he has toughness 4 in this case, so 1 less than the Thane, still 20 wounds, which is very good. He's got his range 3 attack, which I always like, a 3-4-2-4 damage profile, so it's an average damage profile, but at range 3, it kind of allows you to stretch out that movement 3 a little bit and keep him alive for a little bit longer, as opposed to him being within 1 inch of whatever it is you're fighting. They can fight you back, that kind of thing. Range 3 allows you to keep out of engagement range for a little bit. He does have a triple Creed of Flame, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be picking a friendly fighter that's not within 6 inches of this fighter. That fighter makes 2 bonus move actions or a bonus attack action. And then if that fighter has the Beast Rune mark, that fighter makes 2 bonus move actions and then a bonus attack action. I've said in the past that Ossiarch Bone Reapers have the longest range movement ability in the game, effectively allowing them to cover the entire board. So does a Drothmaster, but the difference between them and Ossiarch Bone Reapers is that the Drothmaster can pick any friendly fighter on the board to get those 2 bonus move actions or the bonus attack. Now, I always like remote bonus attack actions. I think they can be very strong. Generally, when we are talking about your games of Warcry, what you tend to see is that you're going to move a fighter into engagement range of your enemy fighter. They're going to attack, do whatever damage they're going to do, and then that enemy fighter is allowed to almost sit there and wait out the rest of the turn. Your opponent can activate other fighters because they basically know that enemy fighter that's been engaged and been attacked already, there isn't all that much else that's going to do unless someone else is going to run in and attack. Creed of Flame helps you get around that and kill that fighter before it activates. The Drothmaster can just use his triple, pick whoever it is that's in range, get them to attack again, and hopefully wipe out whatever it is that they've been fighting. So that really messes with the back and forth dynamic of Warcry, and it really gives your opponent something to think about when they're activating their fighters. Do they go, oh, well, I've got to activate this fighter now, because otherwise the Drothmaster is going to activate, use Creed of Flame, and then get his guy to kill me? in which case it's a completely wasted action? Or does he say, okay, well, I have other things that I need to do with my other fighters during the turn, so do I just risk it and do I leave him to go? I think that's a very interesting dilemma to put into your opponent, and yeah, that's why I think the Drothmaster is actually pretty good, simply for that ability itself. I'd be looking to bring probably one in my lists. There are a lot of different triples that you might want to use with the Fire Slayers. We've already seen the Thane as a triple that you might want to use. The Drothmaster is a triple that's actually pretty good. You've got a bunch of doubles that you want to use also. So I expect this warband to be pretty dice hungry. So I wouldn't bring more than one in this case. His damage, it is what it is. Again, he can use flaming weapons to really boost his damage itself. I quite like that among this warband, that regardless what happens, you can always just use flaming weapons to get massive crit spikes, even against fighters that normally you wouldn't be able to wound very easily. So against toughness 6, toughness 7 fighters, let's say, I know there aren't that many of them, but you know, sometimes Stormcast, they do bring these kinds of fighters. Just being able to turn one of your misses into a crit can really put a chunk of damage into those kinds of fighters and give them something to think about, instead of just going, oh yeah, well, I can charge into you and I'm going to kill you without really taking any damage in return. Next up, I've got the Kyndledroth here. This is the dog of the warband. Every warband needs a pet. Every warband needs dogs nowadays. The Kyndledroth is what the Flameseekers are bringing. It's fairly average, 4/4/2/3 damage profile. I like the 2/3 damage profile. I always have. I think it gives the Kyndledroth a lot of consistency when it attacks. You kind of know roughly what it's going to be doing, and it does have 4 attacks, which is pretty good. It's got a double Kindle Breath, so you can pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of the fighter, roll a number of dice equal to the value of the ability. For each 5+, you're going to allocate 1 damage point to that fighter and to each other visible enemy fighter within 2 inches of that fighter. So it's a little bit like the Flame Hurler from Horns of Hashut. It's nowhere near as strong. The Flame Hurler is doing 3 damage, this is only doing 1. So I wouldn't put all that much stock into this ability. Even if you roll a double 6, on average you're only going to be doing 2 damage to the target and 2 damage to things within 2 inches of it. I think you have other outs for your doubles in this warband that are far more important for you to use. Movement 4, which is interesting, it has access to the basic Fire Slayer double, so it can move, and then it can get another move, so for a total of 12 inches of movement, allowing it to really propel itself across the board, go capture objectives, that kind of thing. It does have the Beast Rune mark, which does have a little bit of synergy with the Drothmaster that we just saw. It makes the Drothmaster's triple a little bit more effective. Something I do want to mention, because people get confused between this, the Beast Rune mark only means that it cannot pick up treasure. It's still allowed to contest objectives. So I think that's where the Kyndledroth kind of comes into its own. With the basic double, allowing it to push itself across the board, it can go and get those far objectives when it needs to. It does have a ranged ability like everyone else. This one is only 1 shot, but it's strength 6 with a 2/4 damage. So on average, it's going to be winning on 3s. I don't see you using that all that much, especially considering it's one of the faster members of the warband. If I was going to bring a Kyndledroth, I'd probably bring them in pairs so that your Drothmaster can reliably buff them and to get more out of that movement 4. But yeah, overall, I think it's fine. I think it's slightly overcosted at 110 simply because of that range profile. Finally, we have the, I say chaff of the warband. They're not really chaff because they're 95 points. We've got Scalebreakers. There are a couple of different flavors of Scalebreakers. You've got Split Axe and you have Bokaz. They are both movement 3, toughness 4 with 12 wounds. The 12 wounds is very welcome. Remember, they do get access to the reaction. So if something that can one-shot them does run in, you can always use their reaction, turn crits into hits, and survive out a little bit longer. The difference between their attacks, the Split Axe is 3/5/2/4, so again has a strength 5. It's going to be using that wound on 3 profile a little bit more than the Bokaz. The Bokaz is 3/4/2/5, so higher crit damage but lower strength. And so which one are you going to be using? You can see here that the Split Axe has more average damage that it's going to be putting on the field. Personally though, I'd be looking at taking the Split Axe simply because there are only so many doubles that you can roll. You're not going to be using flaming weapons on everybody. You're basically going to be pouring your dice into into your Thane when it's in combat and when it's going to be used. You're going to be using dice to be moving things around the board. So I'd want to go for the more consistent profile without dice than with dice, especially in the case of your cheaper chaff units. They all have access to the basic abilities, so Blazing Impetus, Ignite Weapons, and Aspect of the Scale, which is their quad. Aspect of the Scale, you pick a fighter within 3 inches of this fighter, roll 6 dice. For each 2+, you allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to half the value of this ability rounding up. So the question is it better than Rampage? Considering the Rampage is giving you 2 free actions, Rampage is always going to be better in this case. However, if you do manage to roll a really high quad, so let's say you roll a quadra 6 and then you roll your dice, that's potentially a lot of damage. You're going to be looking at around about 15 damage off that quad, which is more than you can get off of 1 free attack from the Rampage. But usually you're not going to be having a quadra 6, in which case it's a lot less damage you're going to be putting onto your opponent. It's definitely a lot less damage than your Thane is going to be putting out with his triples. So yeah, I think generally you're going to be looking at triples over quads when you're going to be playing this warband. But as for the Scalebreakers themselves, as I said, I'd be taking the split axes, but there is nothing wrong with the Bokars. Its stat line is fine. Looking at a couple of allies here, it's the usual order fare. Calthea Zandire, because she can make a bunch of guys move or fight, which is especially good in a majority movement 3 warband. I've also chosen the Old Guard here with Ancestral Weapon and Gromril Shield. It's going to be from Tempest Eye. Why are we bringing it from Tempest Eye? It's because it has access to Swift as the Wind. Swift as the Wind, you add half the value of this ability to the move characteristic of friendly fighters when they make a move action that starts within 6 inches of this fighter. You might think that's a little bit redundant because the Drothmaster does have Creed of the Flame to give things extra move, but I think on earlier turns, it's a better triple to be using simply because it will be able to buff maybe 2, maybe 3 other fighters, allow them to move a little bit quicker, especially when the Old Guard comes on, it's deployed, and the fighters in its deployment group need to be able to get places. It does have synergy with the Fyreslayer's double, the one that allows you to move, and then get an extra move, simply because if you're doing anything to boost that basic movement, you are able to get further across the board. Other alternatives, again, might be the Annihilator with his Meteoric Hammer, the Annihilator Prime, or several of the Stormcast heroes just to get extra damage in. And how do we put this together in a list? I actually think Flameseekers, as a faction, they almost have everything in-house that they want to do, so there isn't really an amazing amount of scope to get allies in, especially with those 95-point basic Scalebreakers. They end up eating into a lot of your points. So what have I got here? I've got Runefather with Great Axe. Like I said, I prefer the axe profiles because they are generally more consistent when you don't have to use dice. I've got 3 Drothblood Thanes. You do only get 1 in the box, unfortunately. So this does mean it is a triple box warband, but you know what? You can convert Thanes. Just get your normal guys, give them 2 axes, and just use them as Thanes. No one will mind. It's kind of okay. We've got the Drothmaster because it does have that very good triple and it's got the range. And then we've got Scalebreakers with split axes. Again, for the same reason you are taking the Runefather with Great Axe. It's an 8-man warband, so it's not especially small. It should have a fair amount of movement tricks in there, so I think you'll be surprised in how quickly it can cross the board and to get the damage of those Thanes. If I were to expand on that, I'm going to be replacing one of the Thanes with an Old Guard so that we can use that Swift as the Wind triple. I think that would be very beneficial in this case. And I'm going to be using the remaining points to give my Thanes the Blessing of Swiftness. This is taking from the Divine Blessing rules that were released in White Dwarf. If you want to check that out and see what more there are, I'm going to be putting a link down in the description below and maybe up here somewhere as to my video on that, and you can see exactly what happened. But essentially the Blessing of Swiftness gives +1 movement to whatever it has, so we're going to be paying 15 points per Thane, make them 155 points, and give them movement 4. So this really allows them to move across the battlefield with that 4-inch move, getting double moves off with the ability, getting more moves off with the Drothmaster. And yeah, I think overall it makes the dwarves a lot quicker. The Thanes are kind of killy enough themselves. The old build isn't terrible by itself. It's got a 4-3-2-4 damage profile, so it's okay. After that turn that it comes on, you can kind of move it around the battlefield and try and get your buffs off, or alternatively you can put your triples into your Drothmaster and into your Thanes when they get into combat. That is it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been interesting for you, just to see how the new Fyreslayers play and how they generally can be a lot quicker on the battlefield than that basic movement 3 would kind of seem. As always, if you like the kind of content I'm putting out, please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down below what you think about the new Fyreslayers. If you've got some interesting builds for them, if you've got some interesting allies that you want to bring, or if you've had any success with them, it's something I'd always like to hear. And yeah, we'll be back next time for some more Warcry content. I've been Itan, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.